tale. What if the woman you see begging on the street saved your life as a child and you never thank her? In the heart of Lagos, one act of kindness echoes through decades, but fate has a way of bringing deaths home. Hello, welcome to African Tales. If this story
Times before, the smell of grilled corn and frying oil filled the air, mixing with the dust that rose from the unpaved sections of the market. But nobody was paying attention to the old woman sitting in the corner near the drainage ditch. Her name was Adana, though the world had long forgotten it. She had become invisible in the way only the poor and elderly can. People looked past her, around her, through her, as if she were a shadow that had somehow gained weight. Her wrapper was faded from what might have once been a deep indigo, now stained with the permanent marks of living on the streets for 3 years. Her gray hair, which she no longer bothered to tie, hung in rough strands around her face. One of her teeth was missing on the left side, and her lips had become thin and papery. She sat with a small aluminum pan in front of her, the kind used for cooking. This morning, like most mornings, she had gotten up before sunrise and made her way to the back of a restaurant near the market. The manager there, a man named Obi, who still had some mercy left in his heart, sometimes let her scoop the leftover food that would otherwise be thrown away. A bit of jollof rice with the spoon mark still visible in it, a few ladles of pepper soup, sometimes a piece of fried fish that had been turned away by a customer because it looked too small. This morning, she had been fortunate. She had a decent amount of rice and beans mixed together with a piece of chicken skin floating on top. Chicken skin, she had learned, was one of the most valuable things a person could eat when they had nothing. It had fat in it, and fat meant energy, and energy meant she could walk through another day. The old woman's hands shook slightly as she picked through the food with a wooden spoon. Her fingers were thin, the skin stretched tight over bone. There were sores on her knuckles from where she had spent the previous night sleeping against the concrete wall of an unfinished building. But she did not complain. Adana had learned long ago that complaining changed nothing. She had worked hard her entire life. In her youth, she had been strong and quick, much sought after as a house help and nanny. She had worked in the homes of important families, caring for their children, cooking their meals, keeping their houses clean. She had been trusted. She had been good at what she did. But then her own children had not returned her loyalty. After her husband died, she had tried to move in with them, but there were always excuses. Her daughter had married a man who did not want old mothers in the house. Her sons had their own problems, their own struggles. The world had moved on, and Adana had been left behind. And now she was here, eating scraps from a pan at the edge of a marketplace where people hurried past with their own concerns. "Get away from here, you old witch!" A voice suddenly shattered her thoughts. Adana looked up to see the owner of the juice stand, a woman named Kioma, with a face that seemed permanently twisted into an angry expression. Kioma was swinging her hand as if to strike the old woman. "You are scaring away my customers with your ugly face. Go somewhere else to be hungry." The people around the marketplace turned to look. Some pretended not to notice. Others stared openly, hungry for drama the way people always are. A child pointed at Adana and laughed. 2 market women making bets on their stall stopped their conversation and watched. Adana stood up slowly, carefully gathering her pan and spoon. She did not speak. Speaking only made things worse. She had learned this through years of public humiliation. The best response to cruelty was silence and movement. Do not give them the satisfaction of your pain. She began to walk away from the stall, her movements slow and careful. At 73 years old, her body was a collection of complaints. Her back ached. Her knees felt as if they were filled with grinding gravel. Her feet, hardened from years of walking, still managed to swell by the end of each day. But she walked, because walking was what you did when someone told you to go. Behind her, she could hear Kioma's voice continuing, mocking her, making jokes about her appearance, about her poverty. Other vendors joined in, laughing. This was entertainment in the marketplace. This was the price paid by those who had nothing left to lose except their dignity, which nobody wanted anyway. Adana found a quieter spot near the fish section where the smell of drying and smoking fish created a haze that seemed to repel the more particular customers. Here, people were too busy negotiating prices and examining merchandise to notice an old woman eating. She sat down on an overturned plastic crate and continued her meal with slow, deliberate bites. Each spoonful she chewed carefully. not because she was savoring the taste, but because her teeth, what remained of them, needed the extra time to break down the food. Her stomach had become small and sensitive after so many months of having very little to eat. She had learned that eating too fast or eating too much at once would only make her vomit it back up. So she ate slowly, giving her body time to remember what it meant to receive nourishment. As she ate, her mind wandered to the past, the way the minds of old people do when their present circumstances are too grim to bear. She thought about the Okonkwo family, where she had worked for nearly 20 years. They had been good employers, wealthy and educated, living in a beautiful house in Ikoyi with 3 children. The youngest child, Ifeanyi, had been born while she was working there. She had practically raised him, carrying him on her back as a baby, singing to him, teaching him his first words, cooking his favorite meals. Ifeanyi had been a sickly child. He was born with asthma, and in those early days before proper medication had arrived in Nigeria, it was a frightening condition. There was one night, years ago, when the child was 7 years old. She had been sleeping in her small room at the back of the house when she heard him struggling to breathe. The sound was terrible, like a person drowning in air. She had run to his room and found him gasping, his small body convulsing as his lungs refused to cooperate. The Okonkwos were away that night. Mr. Okonkwo was at a business dinner in Abuja. Mrs. Okonkwo had gone with him, leaving the older children with their aunt, who was also out, attending a wedding. Only Adana and Ifeanyi were in the house. She had done everything she could think to do. She had held him upright, remembering that this sometimes helped. She had gotten him warm water, even though she was not sure it would help. She had prayed, though she was not a particularly religious woman. The boy's lips were turning blue. His eyes were rolling back in his head. She was certain he was dying. In that moment of absolute terror, with nothing else to lose, Adana had made a decision. She had wrapped the boy in a blanket, gathered him into her arms as carefully as she could, and she had run out into the Lagos night. The nearest hospital was more than a kilometer away. She had run that entire distance carrying a child who was barely breathing, her bare feet pounding against the hot asphalt, her heart hammering in her chest. When she reached the hospital, she had screamed loud enough that doctors came running. They had rushed Ifeanyi into a room, administered oxygen, given him medication. Within minutes, his breathing had eased. Within an hour, he was awake and aware again. By morning, he was going to live. Mrs. Okonkwo had arrived at the hospital to find Adana collapsed on a bench in the waiting area, her feet bleeding, her wrapper torn, her entire body shaking from the exertion and trauma of the night. When she understood what Adana had done, she had wept. She had held the old woman's hands and wept, thanking her over and over, calling her a savior and an angel. Ifeanyi had grown up. He had become a bright student, attending excellent schools, going to university abroad. The Okonkwos had eventually become very wealthy, and Adana had continued to work for them, caring for their household. But eventually, life had scattered everyone in different directions. Ifeanyi had moved away for work. The family had changed. Adana had grown too old to work the hours required of a house helper, and she had been retired with a small payment that seemed generous at the time but had run out within 2 years. She had not seen Ifeanyi since he was a young man. The old woman finished her meal and looked into the empty pan. The rice had been a small amount, and now it was gone. She had 6 hours or so before the restaurant would have more leftover food. In that time, she would need to find some way to pass the hours. Sometimes she walked, sometimes she found a shaded spot and simply sat, watching the world move past her. Sometimes she tried to find any small work that needed doing, though fewer and fewer people were willing to hire someone who looked like her. She was about to stand up when she noticed him. A man was standing on the edge of the marketplace, speaking with one of the older vendor women. He was dressed in work clothes, simple but clean, a faded shirt and dark pants, worn shoes. He was not particularly tall, and at first glance there was nothing remarkable about him. But there was something in the way he stood, the way his eyes moved across the marketplace, that suggested someone who was not entirely comfortable in these surroundings. He was asking the vendor woman questions. She could not hear what he was saying, but she could see the woman pointing in different directions, gesturing, shrugging her shoulders. The man was listening carefully, his attention fully focused on what she was saying. Then the woman pointed directly at Adana. The man turned and looked across the marketplace. For a long moment, He was perfectly still. Even from a distance, Adana could feel the intensity of his gaze. It was not the look of judgment or disgust that she was used to. It was something else, something searching. He thanked the vendor woman and began to walk toward her. Adana's first instinct was fear. This happened sometimes. Men would approach her with either cruelty or false pity, neither of which was ever welcome. She straightened up slightly, preparing to move away, to disappear into the crowd as she had learned to do. But as the man got closer, something in his face changed. His expression shifted from curiosity to confusion, to what looked like shock. He stopped a few meters away from her, and for a moment it seemed as though he was struggling to speak. "Adana," he said quietly. Are you Adana?" The old woman looked at this stranger with the worn clothes and the expensive watch, the quality shoes that had been carefully maintained despite their age. There was something familiar in his voice, in the slight accent that suggested someone educated, but she could not place him. "I am," she said slowly, cautiously, "but I do not know you." The man stepped closer, and in the afternoon light she could see that his eyes were filled with tears. "You do not know me," he said, and there was a quality to his voice that made the hair on her arms stand up. "But I know you. I know you because you saved my life. You carried me through the night when I was dying. You were Adana, my father's housegirl, but you were so much more than that. You were my savior." The old woman's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Ifeanyi?" she whispered. The man nodded, and tears spilled over onto his cheeks. "How is this possible?" Adana asked. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" "I have been looking for you for months," Ifeanyi said. "Ever since I came back to Lagos, I wanted to find you. I wanted to thank you properly. I wanted to help you. I've been searching everywhere, asking people, investigating, and then I found you. I found you here, eating from trash bins, sleeping in the streets, when you should be living in comfort and safety for the rest of your life." He was speaking quickly now, the words tumbling out of him, but Adana was barely hearing them. She was looking at this man, trying to reconcile the small, sick child she remembered with this adult before her. She was thinking about the passage of time, about the strange and terrible ways that life could scatter people and then bring them back together. "Come with me," Ifeanyi said, extending his hand to her. "Please, come with me right now." But before Adana could respond, a voice cut through the marketplace, sharp and familiar and hateful. "Adana, you were supposed to bring food for my children. Why are you sitting here with some strange man instead of doing what I paid you to do?" It was Kioma, the juice vendor, rushing toward them with a crowd of market women following behind her, like a pack of predators who had caught the scent of blood. "You see?" Kioma was shouting now, loud enough for everyone in the marketplace to hear. "This is what the old witch does. She steals money from us, lies to us, and then she disappears. She told me she could get water from the community pump and help with my stall, and I gave her money. I gave her 1,000 naira, and she took it. She took it and ran away like a thief." The crowd was growing now. People were stopping their business to watch. Children were gathering. The marketplace, which only minutes before had seemed vast and scattered, was suddenly closing in, forming a circle. "I did not steal," Adana said quietly. "I used the money to buy food. I was going to work for it." "Liar!" Kioma was getting louder. "You are a liar and a thief. You should be in prison. Somebody get the police. There is a criminal here." The crowd was becoming agitated. Some people were laughing. Others were shouting their own accusations. In the streets and markets of Lagos, where so many people struggled with so little, theft, real or imagined, was unforgivable. Adana found herself standing, backing away, trying to move out of the circle that was forming around her. "It is not true," she said again, but her voice was small and easily drowned out by the noise of the crowd. Ifeanyi stepped in front of her, his body creating a barrier between her and the angry vendors. "Enough," he said, and his voice, though he did not raise it, seemed to cut through the noise. "This woman is under my protection now. Whatever debt she owes, I am paying it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wallet. He extracted several bills without even looking at them and handed them to Kioma. "This is for the 1,000 naira, he said, "and this is for the trouble you are causing her. Consider the debt paid and the matter finished." Kioma took the money, her expression shifting from anger to confusion. This was not the response she had expected. She counted the bills in her hand. There was more than 5,000 naira there. and her face went through several emotions at once. "Well," she said, suddenly uncertain. "Well, yes. The debt is paid then. No hard feelings." But it was too late. The damage had already been done. By the time Ifeanyi and Adana left the marketplace, the story had already begun to spread. The poor old woman had committed theft. She had been caught red-handed. She had stolen money and spent it on herself while pretending to work. This was the version that would be remembered and repeated, no matter what the truth actually was. As they walked away from the marketplace, Adana was acutely aware of the eyes on her back, the whispers that were starting to follow them. "Do not worry about them," Ifeanyi said. His voice was quiet but firm. "What they think does not matter anymore. They do not know who you are. They do not know what you did. I know. That is all that matters." He led her to a car parked on a quiet street nearby. It was a nice car, sleek and well-maintained, but not ostentatious. The kind of car that a successful businessman might own. He helped her into the passenger seat with careful hands, as if she were made of glass and might break. "Where are we going?" Adana asked, still moving as if in a dream. "Home," Ifeanyi said. "You are coming to my home now, and you are never going back to eating from trash bins. That part of your life is finished. You saved my life once when I was a helpless child. Now I am going to save yours." As the car moved through the Lagos traffic, Adana stared out the window at the city streets passing by. She was 73 years old. For the past 3 years, she had thought that her life was essentially over, that she was just waiting for the end to come. She had accepted it. She had made peace with it in the way that the old must when they have nowhere else to go. But this moment, this sudden appearance of someone from her past, this unexpected second chance, it was terrifying. It was also the first real hope she had felt in longer than she could remember. What she did not know, what she could not possibly have suspected, was that this reunion was only the beginning. The marketplace crowd had not yet finished with their accusations, and there was something in Ifeanyi's past, something dark and deliberate, that was about to be exposed, something that would test not only their gratitude, but their understanding of justice itself. For now, though, in the car driving through the evening traffic of Lagos, Adana simply sat with her hands folded in her lap and tried to believe that the nightmare she had been living might finally be coming to an end. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The road ahead curved into darkness, but for the first time in years, Adana was not afraid of the darkness anymore. She was no longer alone. Ifeanyi's home was not the grand mansion that Adana might have expected. It was a well-maintained house in the Lekki area, 4 bedrooms, with a spacious living room and a kitchen that was equipped with modern appliances. It was expensive, certainly, but it was a home of someone with money and taste, not someone flaunting wealth. The walls were painted in soft colors, and there were paintings on the walls that looked like original art. When they arrived, a woman was waiting for them on the porch. She was younger than Ifeanyi, perhaps in her early 40s, with a warm face and kind eyes. She came down the steps with a worried expression. "Ifeanyi, where have you been all day? I've been calling your phone," she said. Then she saw Adana and stopped. "Who is this?" "Amina, this is Adana," Ifeanyi said. "Adana, this is my wife, Amina, the woman I have told you I married to for love and not money." Amina's expression transformed. Understanding flooded across her face. "This is her?" Amina said, and she moved forward to embrace Adana. "This is the woman who saved your life?" Adana stood rigid in the woman's arms, not quite knowing how to respond to this sudden affection from a stranger. "Come inside," Amina said. "You must be exhausted. When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Inside, the house was cool from air conditioning. It was the first time in 3 years that Adana had been in a room with air conditioning. She had almost forgotten what it felt like. The shock of the cold hit her, and for a moment she felt as if she could not breathe. Amina led her to a bathroom and showed her the shower. "You can wash here," she said gently. "I will find you some clean clothes. After that, we will eat dinner together." 40 minutes later, Adana stood in front of a mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. She had washed herself thoroughly, using soap and warm water and shampooing her hair. The dirt and grime that had become so much a part of her that she had stopped noticing it were gone. Her skin, which had appeared almost grayish before, was brown again. The sores on her hands had been cleaned and bandaged. She was wearing a clean wrapper and a blouse that Amina had given her, both slightly loose, but infinitely better than the rags she had been wearing. The old woman looked at herself for a long moment. She had not seen herself like this, clean, cared for, in so long that the image seemed almost unreal. When she came out, the dining table had been set with food. There was jollof rice, grilled chicken, vegetable soup, and fresh fruit. A feast by the standards of Adana's recent life. She almost could not look at it. The sight of so much food made her feel faint. Ifeanyi was already seated at the table with Amina. When he saw her, his eyes grew wet again. "Come," he said. "Sit, eat. You've been starving for too long." Adana sat slowly, and Amina placed a plate in front of her. She looked down at the food as if it might disappear, as if she was still dreaming. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely pick up the fork. Ifeanyi reached across the table and took her hand. "You are safe now," he said. "Truly. No one is going to hurt you again. You have my word on this. For everything you did for me, for my life itself, I am going to spend the rest of my life taking care of you. This is not charity, this is not pity, this is debt repayment, this is gratitude, this is love." The old woman began to cry. The tears came quietly at first, then with more force, until her entire body was shaking with sobs. She had not cried in so long. She had thought that she had used up all her tears years ago, but they came now, 30 years' worth of tears, tears for the loneliness and the hunger and the abandonment and the way the world had forgotten her. Amina came around to her side and held her, the way you would hold someone who was drowning. "Let it out," Amina said. "Let it all out. You are not alone anymore." After dinner, they showed Adana to a bedroom. It was a spacious room with a large bed covered in clean sheets and a soft mattress. There was a private bathroom attached. There were curtains on the windows to keep out the light, and there was a small table with a lamp. To someone who had been sleeping on cold concrete for the past 3 years, it seemed like a palace. "This is your room now," Amina said. "You can sleep as late as you want in the morning. We do not have any schedules here. You just rest and recover." Adana stood in the center of the room, not quite knowing what to do with so much space and comfort. "What will you want me to do?" she asked finally. "How can I repay this?" "You do not need to repay anything," Ifeanyi said. "You already did years ago. You gave me my life. Let me give you yours back." That night, Adana lay in the soft bed, under clean sheets, with a roof over her head that was not about to collapse or leak. The room was dark and quiet. Through the window, she could hear the distant sounds of Lagos at night, traffic, music, the general hum of the city going about its business. For so long, she had been sleeping in places where every sound was a potential threat, where she had to stay half awake, alert to danger. But in this room, she felt safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. She felt protected. The feeling was almost too much to bear. It was so different from what she had become accustomed to that it felt like a betrayal of the person she had been forced to become, the hard, vigilant, suffering version of herself. She allowed herself to cry quietly into the pillow, and then, exhausted in a way that only the deeply traumatized can be, she fell asleep. The next morning, Adana woke to the sound of sunlight coming through the curtains and birds singing outside the window. For a moment, before full consciousness arrived, she did not know where she was. Then memory returned, and with it came a sense of unreality. Had last night been a dream? Had the marketplace been the dream? But the soft mattress beneath her, the clean sheets, the gentle light through the windows, all of it was very real. She got out of bed slowly, her body moving with the caution of age. Her knees felt better than they had in months. She had slept better than she had in years. The human body, it seemed, had an amazing capacity for recovery when given even the most basic care. When she came down to the living room, she found Ifeanyi reading the newspaper on the sofa. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Good morning," he said. "How did you sleep?" "Like a dead person," Adana said, and then immediately looked embarrassed at her choice of words. But Ifeanyi only laughed. "That is good. Your body needed it. Come, Amina has made breakfast. It is ready whenever you are." They ate breakfast together, eggs, bread, fresh orange juice, coffee. Simple food, but prepared with care. Amina told stories about Ifeanyi's childhood that he had apparently forgotten or chosen not to remember. She told them while watching his face to see his reaction. It was clear that this woman loved him deeply. After breakfast, Ifeanyi excused himself to go to his office. He worked from home most days, he explained, and Amina sat with Adana in the living room. "I want to know everything," Amina said. "Ifeanyi has told me about that night when he was a child, but I want to hear it from you. What was it like? What do you remember?" And so Adana told her. She told her about the sickly child, about the terrible night, about the fear that had driven her to carry him through the darkness. Amina listened with the complete attention of someone who was genuinely interested, who cared not just about the story, but about the person telling it. When Adana finished, Amina was crying. "You risked everything for a child that was not even yours," she said. "You risked your job, your reputation, your safety. You did it out of pure love." "It was nothing," Adana said, uncomfortable with the praise. "It was just what needed to be done." "It was not nothing," Amina said firmly. "It was everything. It was the kind of thing that shapes a person's entire life. Ifeanyi has never forgotten what you did. He has been searching for you for so long." Over the next few days, Adana settled into a routine. She would wake up, have breakfast with Ifeanyi and Amina, then spend the day resting or helping Amina around the house, though Amina resisted her attempts at work. In the afternoons, sometimes she would sit in the garden, feeling the sun on her face and listening to the sounds of the city beyond the walls. She was beginning to feel human again. But there was something that was gnawing at her, something that she did not want to bring up but could not quite ignore. She finally mentioned it one evening when they were having dinner. "I am grateful," she said carefully. "More grateful than I can ever express. But I am wondering, what happened to your family, to your parents? Do they know I am here?" Ifeanyi's face changed. The open, happy expression that he had worn since he found her disappeared, replaced by something closed and hard. "My parents passed away," he said finally. "My father died 15 years ago. My mother died 5 years ago." "I'm so sorry," Adana said. "They were good people." "They were," Ifeanyi said, but his voice was strange, distant. He did not say anything more, and Adana did not press. But she could sense that there was something there, something in his history that involved pain. She would learn in time what that was. The next day, when Ifeanyi left for his office, Amina found her in the kitchen. "I want to tell you something," Amina said. "Something that Ifeanyi probably should tell you himself, but I think you should know. When his mother was alive, she never properly acknowledged what you had done. When Ifeanyi tried to find you after his father died, to thank you properly and to help you, his mother actively prevented it. She did not want you in their lives. She said you were from a different class, that you would be strange to have around. She did not acknowledge her debt to you." Adana listened to this without speaking. She could sense that this had hurt Ifeanyi deeply. "That was one of the reasons he finally left Nigeria," Amina continued. "He could not reconcile what he owed you with what his mother wanted, so he left, worked abroad, built his own life. But he never forgot. And when his mother finally passed away, one of the first things he did was come back to Lagos and begin searching for you." The old woman understood then. The intensity of Ifeanyi's gratitude, the way he had wept when he found her. It was not just about the debt. It was about something he felt he had failed to do during his mother's lifetime. It was about redemption and regret, and the human need to make right what has been made wrong. She reached out and took Amina's hand. "Thank you for telling me," she said. It was almost 2 weeks after Adana arrived at the house when the first sign of trouble appeared. Ifeanyi was in his office, working on his computer, when Adana came in with a cup of tea. As she set it down, she noticed something on his desk. A letter, partially opened, with a company letterhead. She could not read the full contents, but she caught enough to understand that it was something important, something business-related. She did not want to pry, so she left the tea and stepped back. But later that evening, when Ifeanyi was in a quieter mood than usual, she asked him if everything was all right. "It is fine," he said, but it was clear that it was not fine. "Just business matters. Nothing for you to worry about." But Adana had lived long enough to know when someone was not telling the truth. Over the next few days, she noticed that Ifeanyi was becoming more stressed. He spent long hours on his computer. He received calls that made him tense and angry. He would sometimes step out onto the porch or into the garden to take these calls, and she could see his face growing darker. Finally, one evening, she asked him directly. "Something is troubling you," she said. "I've known you only a short time, but I can see it. What is wrong? Can I help?" Ifeanyi was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You cannot help," he said. "But I will tell you because I think you deserve to know. There is a woman named Neka. She is my cousin, the daughter of my mother's sister. When my mother died, she left her will. She left most of her money to me, as the eldest son, but she left a significant portion to Neka, over 50 million naira. Neka was supposed to use that money for her education and for starting a business, but Neka did not do that. Instead, she became greedy. She's been spending the money recklessly, making poor investments, getting involved with criminals. She has gambled much of it away." "That is unfortunate," Adana said, not quite seeing the connection to Ifeanyi's current stress. "It is," Ifeanyi agreed. "But that is not the problem. The problem is that Neka has decided that she does not have enough money. She has decided that she deserves more, and she has hired people to help her acquire it." Ifeanyi pulled out his phone and showed Adana a picture. It was a photograph of a woman in her late 30s, with a face that was beautiful but cruel. Her eyes held a cunning that was immediately obvious. "This is Neka," he said. "She has hired a private investigator to dig into my business affairs. She is looking for anything she can use against me, anything at all, to blackmail me or to create legal problems for me. She wants more money, and she's not going to stop until she gets it." "That is terrible," Adana said, genuinely upset. "What can you do?" "I do not know yet," Ifeanyi said. "My lawyer's looking into it, but the point is that I need you to understand that there may be complications. People may come here asking questions about me. My past may be examined. I wanted you to be prepared for that." Adana was confused by this warning. She did not understand what it had to do with her. "Why would that matter to me?" she asked. Ifeanyi was quiet for a moment, then he took her hand. "Because," he said, "I'm going to tell Neka exactly who you are and where you are. I'm going to tell her that you are my nanny, that you have been with my family for decades. I'm going to make it seem as though I am spending significant money on your care and comfort. I want her to believe that you are a legitimate, long-term expense. That way, she will not be able to use it against me. She might be suspicious, but she will not be able to prove anything." "You are going to use me as a cover," Adana said slowly. She was not angry, but she was thoughtful. "To protect your business from your cousin." "In a way, yes," Ifeanyi admitted, "but it is not entirely false. You were my family's nanny for many years. You did raise me, and I am taking care of you, which is the very least I can do. So while the story I am telling Neka has a purpose, it is also the truth." Adana considered this. She had been used by many people over the course of her long life, but this was different. This was someone who had genuinely saved her from a life of degradation and starvation, asking her for one small thing in return. It seemed a fair exchange. "I will do it," she said. "Thank you," Ifeanyi said. "And I want you to understand, I want you to know, that regardless of what happens with Neka, regardless of anything else, I mean what I said, you are truly welcome here. This is your home now for as long as you want it to be." The lie that Ifeanyi told about Adana quickly spread through the family. He mentioned it in a call to his brother, who mentioned it to his wife, who mentioned it to her sister, who mentioned it to... Well, the way gossip works in families, it reached Neka within days. Neka came to the house herself on a day when Ifeanyi was at his office in the city. She arrived in a car that was too expensive for someone in her current financial situation, with a driver presenting herself as still wealthy even though her money was running out. Adana was in the garden when Neka arrived. She heard Amina open the gate, heard the elegant greeting, heard Neka's voice with its affected accent, the accent of someone who had lived abroad for a while and was trying to maintain the illusion of being different from her own people. Amina came to find Adana. "Ifeanyi's cousin has come," she said. "She wants to meet you. I think you should come inside." Neka was sitting in the living room, dressed in expensive clothes, wearing jewelry that gleamed in the afternoon light. When Adana entered, Neka looked at her with an expression of such obvious disdain that Adana almost laughed. So you are the nanny, Neka said, her tone dripping with skepticism, the one that Ifeanyi is supposedly spending all this money on. I am a house helper, Adana said quietly. I have worked for Ifeanyi's family for many years. How many years? Neka asked. Exactly how long? Since Ifeanyi was born, Adana said, which was true, though it had been 30 years ago. Neka's eyes narrowed. She was suspicious, but she could not quite figure out what she was suspicious of. She looked around the house as if searching for evidence of a lie. I find it interesting that Ifeanyi has never mentioned you before, she said finally. Despite all the times we have talked, despite the years I have known him, I find it interesting that you suddenly appear now, just as I am questioning how he is spending his money. I have no control over what Ifeanyi tells his family, Adana said calmly. I have lived a quiet life. I do not require attention or acknowledgement. This answer seemed to frustrate Neka. She stood up and walked around Adana, examining her the way someone might examine a piece of merchandise they were considering purchasing. You are very old, Neka said finally. What use is an old woman in a house like this? I clean, Adana said. I cook. I take care of household matters. I have the skills of someone who has worked in homes all their life. You clean? Neka laughed. But Ifeanyi has household staff for that. He has people who are hired specifically to clean and cook and manage the house. Why would he need an old woman to do what can be done better by professionals? Because, Amina said, stepping into the conversation, Adana is not here just to work. She is family. She raised Ifeanyi when he was a child. She was there for him in ways that other people were not. That is not something that can be replaced by hired staff, no matter how professional they are. Neka looked at Amina with a mixture of anger and frustration. She was not getting the answers she wanted, and she was beginning to realize that her suspicions, while perhaps justified, could not be proven. I find the entire situation suspicious, she said, and I intend to look into it further. After she left, Adana was quiet for a long time. That woman, she said finally to Amina, has a darkness in her. I have seen it before, in other people. It is the darkness of someone who has never been told no, never been allowed to suffer consequences. She believes that the world owes her something. Amina nodded. You are right. Ifeanyi says that she was always like that, even as a child. His mother was very lenient with her, very indulgent. It made her into the person she is now. What will she do? Adana asked. I do not know, Amina said. But I think she will try to prove that you are not who Ifeanyi says you are. She will try to undermine his story. That is what people like her do when they cannot get what they want through honesty. They try to destroy. That night when Ifeanyi came home, Adana told him about Neka's visit. She suspects, Adana said. I do not know what she suspects, but she is not convinced that I am simply an old house helper. That is expected, Ifeanyi said. Neka is intelligent even if she is morally corrupt. She will try to investigate. But there is nothing for her to find, because there is nothing false about the core of the story. You were our family's house helper. You did raise me. I am giving you a home. That is all true. But the why is not true, Adana said. The reason you are doing this, it is not because I worked for your family decades ago. It is because of one specific night, one moment, because you are trying to fix something that your mother did not fix. Perhaps, Ifeanyi said. But does that make it less valid? Does the motivation behind an action change the morality of the action itself? Adana did not have an answer to that question. For the next 3 weeks, life continued much as it had been. Adana settled more comfortably into her role as a member of the household. She helped Amina with various tasks, though Amina never allowed her to do the heavy work. She spent time in the garden, she began to regain weight, and her health improved noticeably. The sores on her feet healed. Her cough, which had been constant during her time on the streets, disappeared. But underneath the surface, things were moving. Ifeanyi received calls from his lawyer. He was frequently on his computer, working on things that he did not fully explain. Adana could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw would clench when he was reading something on his phone. One afternoon, while she was pruning the plants in the garden, work that Amina had finally allowed her to do, understanding that keeping active was important to Adana's sense of self, she heard Ifeanyi arguing with someone on the phone. I do not care what she claims, he was saying. She has no proof. No, listen to me. This is harassment. What she is doing is illegal. Tell her that if she continues with this, I will pursue legal action against her. I will take her to court and make sure that every judge in Lagos knows exactly what kind of person she is." He hung up the phone and stood for a moment in the doorway, his expression dark. "Neka?" Adana asked quietly. Ifeanyi nodded. He came outside and sat beside her on the garden bench. "She has hired an investigator," he said. "She has apparently discovered that there are no records of you being employed by my family in any official capacity. No tax records, no employment contracts, nothing in any of my family's official documents." Adana's heart sank. She had not thought of this. In Nigeria, there were often no official records of domestic employees, especially from decades ago. But to Neka, that absence was proof of deception. "What does this mean?" Adana asked. "It means that Neka has decided that you are not really our family's former house helper," Ifeanyi said. "She has decided that I have made you up, or that I am paying you for some other reason that I do not want to publicly acknowledge. And she is using this to tell people that I am likely committing some kind of fraud or illegal financial activity." "Is she telling people this?" Adana asked, alarmed. "She is trying to," Ifeanyi said. "She has approached one of the financial regulators, suggesting that my business practices should be investigated. It is a desperate move, and it probably will not go anywhere, but it is causing problems." Adana felt a weight settle in her chest. She had been happy for the first time in years. She had thought that her suffering was finally behind her, but now it seemed that her presence was bringing trouble to the one person who had been kind to her. "Perhaps I should leave," she said quietly. "Perhaps I have caused too much difficulty for you." Ifeanyi turned to look at her sharply. "No," he said, "absolutely not. You are not going anywhere. You are not going to run because of Neka's jealousy and cruelty. You are exactly where you are supposed to be, and I am not going to let anyone, not Neka, not the financial regulators, not anyone, change that." But even as he said this, Adana could see the worry in his eyes. Whatever Ifeanyi was saying, whatever promises he was making, she could sense that this situation was becoming more complicated. 2 days later, a car with government license plates pulled up in front of the house. 2 men in official uniforms stepped out and rang the bell. Ifeanyi himself answered the door, and Adana, from her position in the kitchen, could hear the conversation. "Mr. Ifeanyi Okonkwo?" one of the men asked. "I am," Ifeanyi replied. "We are here from the Financial Crimes Unit. We have received a report suggesting irregularities in your business finances. We have a warrant to examine your records." Adana's hands began to shake. She set down the cup that she was holding before she could drop it. Over the next several hours, the officials were in Ifeanyi's home and in his office, examining his computer, asking questions, taking notes. They spoke with Ifeanyi. They spoke with Amina. They even asked to speak with Adana. She sat in the living room with one of the officials, a woman with a stern face and skeptical eyes. "I understand that you work for Mr. Okonkwo," the woman said. "Is that correct?" "I live in his house," Adana said carefully. "I help with household matters." "How long have you been doing this?" 3 weeks, Adana said. The woman's eyes sharpened. 3 weeks? And Mr. Okonkwo says that you have worked for his family for more than 30 years. How do you explain that? Adana's heart was pounding. She knew that the truth, the full truth of how she had come to live with Ifeanyi, would sound suspicious. But she also knew that lying to a government official was far more dangerous than telling the truth. "I did work for his family long ago," Adana said, "when Mr. Ifeanyi was a child. But that was 30 years ago. I did not work for them continuously. I worked for them for many years, and then I left. I had my own life. But recently I was living on the streets. I was very poor. Mr. Ifeanyi found me. He took me in and gave me a home. That is the truth." The woman was quiet for a long moment, writing in her notebook. "So you are not actually his employee," she said. "You are more of a charity case." The way she said it made Adana's skin crawl. It made it sound like she was nothing, like she was some kind of discarded object that Ifeanyi had picked up out of pity. "I was his family's nanny," Adana said with as much dignity as she could muster. "I helped raise him. I did something important for him when he was a child. He has given me a home because he felt that I deserved it. That is what family does." The woman made another note and left. After the officials had gone, the house felt different. It felt violated somehow, as if the presence of the government people had infected it with suspicion. Ifeanyi gathered both Adana and Amina in the living room. "I want you both to understand what is happening," he said. "Neka is trying to destroy my business and my reputation by suggesting that I am involved in some kind of financial crime. She is using Adana as the evidence for her accusations, suggesting that I am hiding money through false employment records." "Can she do that?" Amina asked, frightened. "Probably not," Ifeanyi said. "My business records are clean. All my money comes from legitimate sources. All my investments are above board. When the regulators finish their investigation, they will find nothing. But the investigation itself is going to be messy and public and very damaging to my reputation." He looked at Adana. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry that I brought you into this. I was trying to protect myself, but I ended up making things worse for you. I have made your life more difficult again, just after you were starting to recover." "This is not your fault," Adana said quietly. "This is your cousin's fault. This is the fault of a woman who has too much money and not enough heart. Do not apologize to me. What will you do?" Ifeanyi stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "I am going to fight her," he said. "I am going to prove that my business is legitimate. I am going to expose what she has done, and I am going to make sure that she understands that she cannot intimidate me or use me as a stepping stone to more money. That is what I am going to do." Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation continued. More officials came. There were more questions. Ifeanyi's lawyer was constantly on the phone, constantly meeting with regulators and investigators. The stress was visible on everyone in the house. Amina's face grew pale. Ifeanyi barely slept. And then, one evening, Ifeanyi called a meeting. "I have been in contact with journalists," he said. "I'm going to go public with the story. I'm going to tell everyone, the media, the public, everyone, exactly what Neka has done. I'm going to show them the evidence that she hired an investigator to fabricate claims against me. I'm going to show them her history of financial crimes and her gambling addiction. And I'm going to ask the question that everyone should be asking. Why would the Financial Crimes Unit take seriously the accusations of a known criminal?" "Will that work?" Amina asked. "I do not know," Ifeanyi said, "but it is the only move I have left. If I stay silent, she wins. If I go public, at least I have a chance." The next morning, it was all over the news. Ifeanyi's story made headlines. Billionaire accuses cousin of using financial regulators in personal vendetta. The investigation into his business was revealed to be based on the testimony of someone with a clear financial motive to harm him. The regulators, realizing that they had been played by Neka, quietly ended their investigation. But something else happened as well. When Ifeanyi went public, he also explained why Neka had been so interested in proving that Adana was not who she claimed to be. He told the story of his childhood, of the night that Adana had saved his life, and of her subsequent decades of struggle. He explained that he had found her homeless and poor, and that he had brought her into his home. He told the world exactly who Adana was. The story captured people's imaginations. Here was a man who had spent his entire adult life trying to repay a debt of gratitude. Here was a woman who had sacrificed everything for a child not her own, who had been abandoned by her own family, who had ended up homeless and forgotten. And here was a moment of redemption, a moment when that sacrifice was finally being acknowledged and rewarded. Media outlets wanted to interview Adana. They wanted to hear her story in her own words. She refused all of them. But Ifeanyi did several interviews himself, telling her story and his own gratitude. The public reaction was powerful. People were moved by the narrative. There were think pieces about loyalty and gratitude and the way that society abandoned its elderly poor. Neka, meanwhile, became a symbol of everything wrong with wealth and entitlement. She was publicly condemned, vilified, compared to various villains from literature and film. And then, something unexpected happened. Reporters digging into Neka's background began to discover things. They discovered that she had been involved in illegal business dealings. They discovered that she had taken money that was not hers, that she had defrauded people, that she had engaged in various crimes over the years. One reporter in particular became obsessed with the story. She dug so deep that she uncovered something that no one else had found. She discovered that Neka had been involved in a fraud scheme that had harmed over 100 people, many of them elderly and poor themselves. She discovered that Neka had stolen more than 200 million naira from these victims over a 5-year period. Armed with this evidence, the reporter went to the authorities. This time, the investigation was not based on the false testimony of a jealous woman. This time, it was based on real evidence of real crimes. Neka was arrested. The story had taken a turn that no one could have predicted. What had started as a simple family conflict had turned into the exposure of a criminal enterprise. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived. On the day of Neka's arrest, the news showed footage of her being led out of her home in handcuffs, her face transformed from its usual expression of confidence and disdain into something desperate and terrified. The woman who had been so certain of her right to more money than she already had was now facing the very real possibility of spending years in prison. Adana watched the footage on the television in the living room. She felt no satisfaction at the sight. She felt only a kind of sadness, the sadness of watching someone destroy themselves through their own greed and cruelty. Ifeanyi found her sitting there, staring at the screen. "Are you all right?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Yes," Adana said. "I was just thinking about how a person comes to be like that, how someone starts with so much and ends up with nothing because they could never be satisfied with what they had." "That is her choice," Ifeanyi said. "She made her decisions, and now she has to face the consequences." "I know," Adana said, "but that does not make it less sad." The house, after Neka's arrest, began to settle back into a normal rhythm. The investigators were satisfied. Ifeanyi's business was cleared of any wrongdoing. The scandal died down, replaced by other scandals, other stories that captured the public's attention. But Adana had become known, whether she wanted to be or not. She was the nanny who had saved a billionaire's life. She was the woman who had been abandoned by society and then rescued by gratitude. She was a symbol of something that people wanted to believe in, the idea that good deeds were not forgotten, that karma existed, that justice could prevail. One day, about a month after Neka's arrest, Amina came to her with a letter. "This is for you," she said. "It arrived this morning." Adana opened the letter. It was from a woman named Mrs. Olanyi, the mother of one of Neka's victims. The letter said, "Dear Adana, I do not know if you will remember me. You do not know me at all, in fact. But I wanted to write to you to tell you that your story gave me hope when I had none left. My mother was one of the people that Neka defrauded. She lost almost all of her life savings to Neka's schemes. She was devastated, broken by it, convinced that there was no justice in the world. But then she read your story, and something changed. She realized that sometimes the universe does right its wrongs. Because of your story and because of Ifeanyi's public accusation against Neka, other victims came forward. More evidence was gathered, and Neka was brought to justice. My mother will get her money back. She will be able to live her final years without the crushing worry that was destroying her. I wanted to thank you. I wanted to tell you that your suffering, as terrible as it was, ended up saving others from experiencing the same thing." With gratitude and respect, Mrs. Olanyi Adana read this letter 3 times, and then she gave it to Ifeanyi to read. "Do you see?" Ifeanyi said when he finished. "Do you see what has come from all of this, from you and me finding each other again? It is not just about us, it is about so many other people." "I do not feel like a hero," Adana said. "I feel like I have simply lived. I did what seemed right when I was younger, and I have suffered because of the harshness of the world, and now, by accident, some good has come from that suffering." "That is what it means to be a hero," Ifeanyi said. "It is not about intention. It is about the consequences of your actions. It is about the effect that your life has on the lives of others." Time passed. Months turned into a year. Adana's life, which had been for so long a study in degradation and survival, became something else entirely. It became a study in healing and acceptance and the possibility of second chances. She grew stronger. The sores disappeared entirely. The cough was gone. She gained weight until her clothes fit her properly. Her gray hair, which Amina had helped her to grow out, became long enough to tie into a neat bun. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw a woman who had suffered, yes, but who was also someone deserving of respect and care. She developed a routine. In the mornings, she would wake early and sit in the garden with coffee, listening to the birds. During the day, she would help Amina, though in ways that mostly involved planning meals and sometimes preparing ingredients, work that kept her active but did not exhaust her. In the evenings, she would sit with Ifeani and Amina, and they would talk or listen to music, or simply exist together in comfortable silence. One day, about a year after she had first come to the house, Ifeani brought her something. "I have a gift for you," he said. "I have been waiting for the right moment, and I think this is it." He handed her a small box. Inside was a photograph, printed on high-quality paper, encased in a beautiful wooden frame. It was a photograph of a young boy, perhaps 7 years old, lying in a hospital bed. He was thin and fragile-looking, with an oxygen mask on his face, but his eyes were open and alert, and there was a small smile on his face. Next to him, sitting on the edge of the bed, her face turned toward the camera with an expression of profound relief and love, was a younger Adana. "My mother took this photograph," Ifeani said, "on the morning after you brought me to the hospital. I was looking through old boxes of family photographs and I found this. I wanted you to have it. I wanted you to see yourself the way my mother saw you that morning, as someone who had saved everything that mattered to her." Adana looked at the photograph for a long moment without speaking. She was looking at a younger version of herself, at a time when she was still strong, still hopeful, still able to believe that her goodness and hard work would be rewarded. "Thank you," she said finally, and her voice was thick with emotion. She placed the photograph on the small table beside her bed, and that is where it would stay for the rest of her life. Every morning when she woke, the first thing she saw was that image of herself as a younger woman, the nanny who had saved a child's life. It was a reminder of who she had been, and in some ways, who she still was. Nearly 3 years after Adana had arrived at the house, on a day when the afternoon sun was painting everything gold, she was sitting in the garden when Ifeani came to her with something written on his face that she could not quite identify. "I have something to tell you," he said, sitting beside her on the bench, "something that I should have told you a long time ago, but that I was afraid of." Adana's heart rate increased slightly. After everything that had happened, she knew that fear often preceded important changes. "Tell me," she said. "My mother," Ifeani said slowly, "was not a good woman. I have not told you much about her because, to be honest, I have been ashamed. But I think it is time for you to know the truth." He took a breath. "When you saved my life that night, when you carried me through the darkness to the hospital, my mother was grateful. But her gratitude did not last long. As I grew older and stronger and healthier, she seemed to forget what you had done. She seemed to resent you, actually. I think it was because you represented a kind of loyalty to me that was deeper than her own. You would have sacrificed anything for me without question, and perhaps that made her feel insufficient as a mother." Adana listened without interrupting. "As I became older, she actively discouraged any contact between us. When you eventually left our household, she seemed relieved. And years later, when I tried to find you, to thank you properly and to help you, she actively prevented it. She told me that you were not important anymore, that I should not dwell on the past. She made it very clear that she did not want you in our lives." "I had begun to suspect this," Adana said quietly. "I want you to know," Ifeani continued, "that I have spent years trying to understand why she felt the way she did, and I have come to the conclusion that she was driven by fear and insecurity. She was afraid that if she acknowledged you fully, if she allowed you into our lives as family rather than servant, she would somehow lose control. She was afraid of what it would mean about herself if she had to admit that another woman had saved her son's life in a way that she could not. Your mother and I, Adana said, we came from very different worlds. I do not think either of us understood the other. Perhaps, Ifeani said, but I have had to make a decision about this. I have had to decide whether to remain angry with my mother for what she did, or whether to try to understand her and move beyond that anger. And I have decided that I want to move beyond it. But I also want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life thanking you for what you did. I will spend the rest of my life making sure that you are cared for and respected and loved. Adana reached out and took his hand. Your mother, she said, gave birth to you. I only carried you through one night. Do not repay kindness with bitterness toward her memory. That will only poison your own life. "How do you remain so wise?" Ifeanyi asked. "How do you remain so forgiving after everything that has been done to you?" "Because," Adana said, "I learned long ago that anger and bitterness are luxuries that the poor cannot afford. They eat at you from inside. They consume more energy than it takes to simply accept what has happened and move forward. I have been angry before. It did not help me. It only made me smaller." About 6 months later, Amina told Adana that she was pregnant. The news filled the household with joy. Ifeanyi became almost unbearably excited about the prospect of becoming a father. He read books about child development and nutrition. He set about preparing a room in the house as a nursery. He would sometimes lay his hand on Amina's belly and speak to the baby, telling it stories and singing softly. Ifeanyi's eyes were filled with a hope so deep it felt fragile, as if the slightest tremor could shatter it. "When my child is born," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I want you to be there. I want you to be the one who first holds them, who blesses them. Amina and I have spoken. We want you to be their godmother, to give them a name. Will you do this for us, Adana? Will you become the grandmother this child will cherish?" Adana looked from Ifeanyi's earnest face to Amina's, who stood by the doorway, her hand on her growing belly, nodding with tears in her eyes. For a moment, Adana was speechless. The market, the hunger, the shame, it all felt like a story from another lifetime. She, who had been called a witch and a thief, was now being asked to bless a new life. She took a slow breath, the air in the luxurious room feeling sacred. "I would be honored," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Months later, the house was filled with the tiny, demanding cries of a newborn baby boy. They named him Chukwebuka, meaning God is great, but it was Adana who gave him his second name, Namdi, in honor of Ifeanyi's late father, a secret whisper of legacy between her and the man she had helped raise. She held the baby in her arms, her old hands steady, her heart overflowing. She sang to him the same lullabies she had sung to Ifeanyi decades ago, her voice now softer, laced with the wisdom of survival. The past, with all its ghosts and sorrows, finally began to fade, replaced by the warmth of the small body nestled against her chest. This was her purpose now, not just to be cared for, but to care in return, completing the circle of her life. The christening was a grand affair, held in the garden of Ifeanyi's home. Sunlight filtered through the trees, dappling the white tents and the guests dressed in their finest lace and brocade. Adana sat in a place of honor beside Ifeanyi and Amina, holding little Namdi, her face a mask of serene joy. She watched the people who had once pitied or scorned her now approach with smiles and respect. Among the crowd was Kioma, the market vendor who had once screamed at her. She approached hesitantly, her face a mixture of shame and awe, and knelt before Adana. "Mama, please forgive me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was blind with my own troubles. I did not see the queen in you." Adana simply smiled and touched the woman's head. "Rise, my daughter," she said softly. "God has forgiven us all." One evening, as the sun set and painted the Lagos sky in hues of fire and gold, Adana sat on the veranda, watching Ifeanyi play with his son. He lifted the boy high in the air, and the baby's laughter echoed in the quiet air. Ifeanyi caught her eye and smiled, a look of profound, unspoken gratitude passing between them. At that moment, Adana found a small, folded piece of paper in the pocket of the wrapper she was wearing. It was a letter she had written years ago, on a night when she thought she would not survive until morning, a final prayer to a God she feared had forgotten her. She unfolded it, her old eyes tracing the faded words. It was a plea for mercy, a cry for a sign that her life had not been in vain. She looked from the desperate words on the paper to the scene before her, a thriving family, a laughing child, a home filled with peace. She slowly tore the letter into tiny pieces and let the evening breeze carry them away like chaff in the wind. The debt had been paid, not the one Ifeanyi thought he owed her, but the one she owed to herself, the debt of hope. She had survived long enough to see her own prayer answered. Her past was no longer a ghost that haunted her. It was a story, a testament to the fact that even in the deepest darkness, a single act of kindness could light the way home. She closed her eyes, the baby's laughter a sweet melody, and for the first time in a lifetime, Adana felt truly and completely at peace. Her second chance, not just a gift she had received, but one she had finally learned to accept. We hope you enjoyed this powerful story of redemption and second chances. True kindness is a seed that, once planted, can grow into a forest of miracles, no matter how long it lies dormant. What you do for others in their moment of need may one day become the very foundation of your own salvation. Kindness is never wasted. We hope you enjoyed this powerful story. Please share your thoughts in the comments, like this video if you haven't already, and subscribe so you don't miss our next exciting story.